So hello, everyone out there. My name is Kelly Devine. I'm the Artistic Director of the Global Peace Film Festival. We are going to have this slide up for just about another minute in order to allow for everyone to join the Facebook Live event or the Zoom. Want to remind everyone that tonight's conversation is with Jon Osaki and Sharon Sakamoto. The film, Jon Osaki's film that we'll be discussing, had been at the Global Peace Film Festival back in 2019. The name of it is Alternative Facts, The Lies of Executive Order 9066. Want to remind everyone that the conversation, we want to keep it fluid and moving. So what we'll be doing is keeping everyone muted on Zoom and with their video feeds off on Zoom. If you have a question or comment, please use those functions on Facebook and or Zoom in the chat. Nina Strike, the executive director of Global Peace Film Festival, who is sort of producing and directing the show tonight, she will be keeping an eye on those questions and comments. Since we want to keep things kind of flowing, she'll be moderating them to see, when and if it's a good time to bring them into the conversation. We really have these two wonderful guests, and we want you to get the most out of the insights that they're going to bring to not only this film, which looks at a terrible, shameful incident in the United States history from the Second World War, but how those events touch upon what's happening today and how important it is for us to remember history so that we stop repeating it. So just want to check in with Nina. Do you think we've had a number of people sign on?
I see some people on Facebook Live.
Okay, great. Well, then let me start by hello, everyone. I'm going to introduce our guests. We're so honored to have Jon Osaki and Sharon Sakamoto here because this is, pardon me, this is Asian American Pacific Islander Heritage Month, and this is a real honor to have these two people come and speak with us about these particular issues. Jon Osaki has been the executive director of the JCYC, the Japanese Community Youth Council in San Francisco, since 1996. He has made short films, but this was his first feature film, Alternative Facts, The Lies of Executive Order 9066. This played at the Global Peace Film Festival last year, 2019, although it seems like a century ago with the COVID lockdown. And Sharon Sakamoto, although you do not see her in the film, she was one of the attorneys arguing one of the key cases in the film. And we will learn more about her role as as a speaker for the organization Stop Repeating History, which is playing an integral role of using the film Alternative Facts in order to, as the name of the organization implies, to recognize moments in history have resonance in today, and we need to recognize and learn those lessons in order to stop repeating that history. So Jon, if you wouldn't mind telling us a little bit more about yourself, as well as telling us about the film, just in case some of the folks who are listening in have not had a chance to see the film.
Sure. And, thank you again for having me here today. And, I'm really grateful that I had an opportunity to screen live at your festival in Orlando. It was actually my first trip to Florida. So that was a wonderful experience. And, I think when I started to work on this film, it was my hope that we could bring it to different communities like Central Florida. So we're just really, really pleased to have that opportunity. And so just a little bit about me. So I am really a lifetime activist. I've been working on behalf of children and youth, really my entire adult life. and just more recently got into film. And I just found that it was just a really powerful way to share stories, to share history. And I was in particular interested in how I could connect kind of those two worlds and bring history to a lot of young people who are not taught these things in school, who know little about many of the tragic mistakes that this country has made over the years. And so our film is about the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II. And it is about the fact that this government, United States government, lied about why it was necessary to lock up nearly 120,000 Japanese Americans during that time. And not only were those lies used to justify the orders from the military, but then when people in the United States Justice Department found out about them, they proceeded to cover them up. And so when the cases that Sharon was involved with made it to the Supreme Court in 1943 and 1944, a lot of this information started to become to the attention of attorneys in the Justice Department. Very unfortunately, they chose to suppress it. They chose to cover it up to make sure that nobody knew about the lies that were used to justify these orders, and that they were really based upon politics. They had nothing to do with national security. They had nothing to do with keeping people safe. It was really about a political agenda to remove Japanese Americans, and specifically Japanese farmers, from the West Coast. So it was just a very dark chapter in American history. And I think the narrative is that people were hysterical, and it was a mistake that was made during a very stressful period when we entered World War II. And I think our film was really focused on shedding light on the fact that this was not just people making a mistake, that it was really part of unfortunately, a very calculated political agenda. And I think most of America does not know this side of the story, even within the Japanese American community. And so that's why I thought it was so important to share this with as many people as possible.
I agree. I mean, I remember when you were down and the reception to the film. I remember when the lights came up and you and I walked up to take the questions from the audience, that people were clearly riveted by what they had just seen, but they were also a little stunned by it.
Absolutely, and that's a very common reaction I get with audiences across the country. And again, even with a lot of people who are very familiar with this history, most do not, pretty much everybody, even some of the people who are in the film, admitted to me that they did not understand this full picture of how deceitful and really how so many things fell into place to cover this up, and how it's just a really tragic story. And at the same time, I think a very inspiring story on how the evidence was found, how it was brought to light, how people did stand up eventually to right this wrong. And it eventually resulted, had a big influence over this country eventually making an apology for this mistake and acknowledging that, what they did was 100% wrong during World War II.
Well, and Jon, I think mentioning the process by which this full story came to be is a great time to bring Sharon into the conversation. Sharon, you have such an incredibly personal connection to this story. It's not just because you are a talented attorney. Your connection, is the fact that you were born in one of the camps.
I was, Kelly. I was born in Camp Minidoka, Idaho. And I also had the privilege of working on Gordon Hirabayashi's Kormanobis case. So Gordon, I want to go back and say that, yes, I was born in one of the concentration camps in Minidoka, Idaho, far from the home my parents and siblings knew in Seattle, Washington. And growing up, I was very often thoughtful of that very fact that I was the one who was born in Idaho. But my family's story is really the story of the over 120,000 Japanese Americans and immigrants who in 1942 were wrongfully targeted and imprisoned without respect of civil rights or human rights under the guise of national security and military necessity. My parents, Roy and Josephine Sakamoto, both American citizens born in the Pacific Northwest, had 4 young children in December 1941 when the United States declared war on Japan in response to the bombing of Pearl Harbor. I can't begin to imagine or really understand the full extent of the harm and hurt my parents and siblings suffered as Japanese Americans in camp. I know their images and memories and feelings of life in Camp Minidoka behind barbed wire, under armed guards, had great effect on them, even if seldom discussed or explored. Upon the issuance of Executive Order 9066 on February 19th, 1942, my parents went and took their 4 young children, my older siblings, to live in the horse stalls and other animal shelters at the county campgrounds in Puyallup, Washington. This living arrangement lasted until spring of that year, when the prisoners, euphemistically referred to as evacuees, could be moved to hastily built mass incarceration sites inland off the West Coast. All persons of Japanese ancestry, citizens and immigrants, were moved under armed guard, far away from their homes, their livelihoods, their schools, and in many, many cases, their friends and their communities. The evacuation happened quickly, with the announcement about 2.5 months after the bombing of Pearl Harbor that all persons of Japanese ancestry must report. And in that short time, many community leaders had already been taken away, removed out of their homes, and many families had been separated. The transport of the Japanese communities to the horse stalls was completed in very swift military fashion. With their civil rights cast aside, all persons of Japanese ancestry were criminalized, demonized, and incarcerated. Racism prevailed in the name of our America. In 1944, my parents thought my father might be separated from us. He had been served with draft papers and passed his physical exams. So anticipating he would have to serve in the Army, he petitioned for our early release from camp, because if left there, my mother with 5 young children would not have been able to move and would not have had a place to go. My parents wanted us to remain together as a family and not be torn further apart as other families were. In the end, my father was not called. We moved out of camp in spring of 1944. I'm grateful we stayed together. My parents rarely spoke much of camp days, except in the recounting of fun, funny, or positive family stories, a conscious decision on their part, so none of us would be bitter. As soon as we could manage, my family returned to Seattle to restart and rebuild our lives. Coming out of camp, with the extreme prejudice and rampant racism still directed to all persons of Japanese ancestry, my parents decided not to speak Japanese in our home. Before camp, my older siblings were bilingual and spoke and heard the Japanese language every day. After camp, for our safety, we children spoke English only in our home and no longer used our given Japanese names. We all have them, Japanese names. I am Mieko, and I love my Japanese name. I will not detail my thoughts of the psychological injuries and emotional effects of my family's life in Camp Minidoka. We all have scars and the stigma. I suggest that every single person and every single family in any of the 10 camps have scars they have covered over in living their lives. Having been born in Camp Minidoka, I have my haunts. The damage, the hurt, the scars last. So perhaps you can begin to understand the excitement, the thrill, and the great privilege I had with the opportunity as a then law student in 1983 to work on Gordon Hirabayashi's Coram Nobis case here in Seattle, Washington. Gordon, along with Fred Korematsu in San Francisco and Min Yasui in Portland, filed Coram Nobis. They all filed Coram Nobis actions to vacate their wartime military criminal convictions for refusing to be imprisoned in the camps, and in Gordon's case, for violating the curfew levied against only the Japanese. As you know, Korematsu, Yasui, and Hirabayashi won their cases. Their criminal convictions were vacated. In truth, not one of them was a criminal at all. On my part, I was and am still overjoyed that Gordon Hirabayashi's Coram Nobis case actually went to trial, not because of the added action, but because the added process eradicated the pretenses and solidified the true legal underpinnings. The Coram Nobis court looked at the evidence presented and heard witnesses. At the Hirabayashi trial, Edward Ennis testified. He was a critical and star witness. After 4 years, with documentary evidence presented and witness testimony heard, the Hirabayashi Coram Nobis courts ruled that our government's wrongful conduct intentionally hid the racist intent, the true basis of the incarceration. The Hirabayashi Coram Nobis District Court in 1986 found that the government withheld and suppressed evidence and gave pretenses, those alternative facts, of non-existent national security and military necessity. The government in 1942 hid the truth. The Hirabayashi Coram Nobis Appellate Court in 1987 opined that a United States citizen who is convicted of a crime on account of race is lastingly aggrieved. The Coram Nobis cases uncovered the truth. Pure racism was the basis of the incarceration of my family and 120,000 others of Japanese ancestry without conviction of any crime. The aggrievement continues to this very day. Gordon Hirabayashi's case and all the Coram Nobis cases help me stand proudly today, personally and professionally. The cases in open courtrooms set the record straight and corrected earlier law. The uncovered truths given in the evidence and testimony openly and clearly revealed that the horrendous shame of the incarceration must be placed where it belongs, on our own government, and not on the 120,000 incarcerated persons of Japanese ancestry. The 1942 Korematsu court capitulated to the political yelling cries of national security and military necessity without any effort to analyze or understand if or how the political yelling cries were reasonable or even credible. In our democratic system, I believe we can learn from the truth of our history. We must and should expect more of our courts and our legal system. Our courts must be the arm of our democracy to be intellectually honest in determining true reasons and explanations on all levels of governmental action. Perhaps a 1942 mass incarceration will not happen again. Back then, the government knew that not a single act of espionage or sabotage had been committed by anyone they had rounded up or any of the Japanese population on the West Coast. The government knew and had expert advice and opinion from its own agencies, no less, from the FBI, the FCC, and the Office of Naval Intelligence, that national security could be upheld on a case-by-case individual basis. The government knew that the national security and military necessity arguments put before the Supreme Court were a sham, and the Coram Nobis cases proved their shame. During the trial, Gordon stated that the case was not just his case or a local Japanese American case. It was an all-American case. How true is that? So I think today we cannot stand by, not any one of us, and allow our leaders at any level to lie and cheat or play intellectual games and put shame on some of us. I personally know, and I call on all of you to understand that targeted, undeserved shame keeps us down and apart, fuels fear, and in truth is not what our country stands for. Such strategies, and we must all constantly and vigilantly be alert to them, not only threaten us as individuals, as communities, and as peace-loving citizens, but more broadly, those secrets and lies directly threaten our American democracy and our United States. I have and possess a myriad of truths from my family's experience and my work on Gordon Hirobashi's Coram Nobis case. I want to just share a few. One is that trust is based on truth, and we must keep after truth, even if it takes a generation, which it did in the Coram Nobis cases. And when powerful people perpetrate alternative facts in simple words fitting our current president, bad things will happen. So only with and by truth, in actions, in policies, in laws, and in law enforcement, will democracy survive and grow and the world become a better place. Thank you.
Oh, thank you so much. And thank you, Mieho. So I want to call you by that name. It is a beautiful name. And thank you for sharing that. You know, while I was listening to you talk, so many things, you know, in my own mind were connecting. John, you can get back into the conversation as well, you know, with what's going on today, with what you said, Sharon, about how important trust and truth are for democracy to work.
Mhm.
I think that's really something that is very much in danger and is not in, you know, we shouldn't see it through a partisan lens necessarily, because that's not the issue. You can
Correct.
disagree with someone on economic policy or foreign policy, but we need to have a shared basis of trust and truth in order to accept our differences as well as our agreements in good faith. And that is something that I feel is endangered right now.
Mhm.
And so I'm so glad that again, John, one of the things about your film was, and it was something that you had said to me earlier, was that not being an attorney yourself, you tried in a way to translate the intricacies and the what could come off as very arcane researches into legal processes in order to make sure that people understood that this was based on a narrative, a discriminatory, shameful narrative, but you wanted to replace it with a narrative that people could easily grasp and understand in terms of the universality.
Yeah, I mean, I think that these cases are well understood in the legal community. Certainly the Korematsu case is one of the most famous, and my understanding is essential for law students to learn about. But I think for the rest of us non-attorneys, I think that I know certainly for myself, I had very little understanding of what the real underpinnings were of this story and really how deceitful this whole process was. And so it was really my task as a filmmaker to figure out, how do I make this accessible, just not to the general public, but I was really interested in making it accessible to young people, and tell it in a way where it's very relatable, where the concepts are very easy to follow and to understand. And even that honestly was a struggle. I've had many people, including my wife, share with me that she had to watch it several times to absorb all the information, because there's a ton. I mean, it really is such a complicated, intricate web of a story that, frankly, I think some have tried to tell, but I think we were fortunate in that I think that having fresh eyes on this story allowed us to share it in a way where a lot of people it resonated, I think, with a lot of audiences. And I think part of what I was thinking about when Sharon was talking is that part of what is so important right now, what we're understanding and what I'm understanding, is how important it is to not only teach history, but to reteach history and to reshare these lessons that we should have learned from. I grew up at a time when these cases were taking place, and this country was apologizing to our community about what happened. And so I for many years thought that, by and large, people in this country understood how wrong this was, and that this was such a grievous mistake, and that we as a country, we're going to learn from it. And I now realize that that may have been the case for a short period of time, but it's so important that we continue to have these discussions and that we continue to teach these lessons, because clearly many in this country have forgotten. And I know for a fact that there are people all across this country who have no idea this country once incarcerated an entire ethnic group. And so I think it's really, part of the reason why I have, been so grateful that festivals like the Global Peace Film Festival has shared the stories, that I just think there are so many audiences, so many groups of people who are learning many of these things for the first time, and that is so important to share with communities, not just today, but on a regular basis.
And there was something else that we had discussed earlier that I wanted to touch on. I had asked you about this concept that I have run into in a couple of places, of referring to Asian Americans as the model minority or the good minority, and I really wanted people to hear your reaction to that, and your explanation of what that really, how damaging that kind of narrative can really be.
Well, I appreciate you bringing that up. And, that really speaks a lot to the work that I do at the Japanese Community Youth Council, and really our orientation as an organization. We were established in 1970, when a lot of the ethnic studies movements were happening around the country. And, what we really built, our foundation as an organization is that communities of color are much more powerful when we work together. And, we have been very fortunate that we have forged very strong alliances with not just other ethnic Asian communities, but the African American community and Latino community. And we have been able to bring resources and provide opportunities for young people of all backgrounds, because we have worked together, because we have been allies to each other. And I think that during that whole period of civil rights, movement and the ethnic studies movement, I think that there were a lot of people in power who saw the power of communities working together, of standing up for one another and really being allies to each other. And so there was a very intentional effort to divide us, to make sure that our communities would not be mobilizing together and to drive a wedge between us. And so this narrative got created that Asians are the model minority, and despite the oppression we have, experienced as communities, we have risen above this. And it's incredibly damaging, not just in the sense that it really diminishes our collective power as communities of color, but it also then now creates this narrative that Asians don't have issues, that don't have concerns, that don't have needs. And so that has been very damaging to a lot of communities who have tremendous needs, who are recent immigrants, who are unfortunately now coming under attack with this notion of that the COVID-19 virus, that we should blame China for that, and all Asian communities are being affected by that. So I really think that this whole dynamic really was meant to divide communities of color and to really oppress our collective power.
Yeah.
I think that's definitely true, that is a tactic that is very divisive, not just among communities of color, but it is divisive with all kind of marginalized groups, because it becomes competition for what? We're all in this together, and we're not
Right.
against one another. And that whole strategy is really just a divisive strategy. And I'm glad you brought up the current blaming of the virus on China, John, because there's been such an uptick of Asian American violence and incidents of Asian American hatred. And it reminds me clearly of the Yellow Peril and the narrative, the political narrative that was going on in the 20s and through the 40s about the Japanese Americans, the Yellow Peril, and all those political efforts to divide the labor force and divide the economic contributions that were being made by the Asian groups at that time. And I look at what's happening at the borders with the separation of families and all of those kind of tactics and strategies to really undermine growth in our America.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things I was most struck by when I made this film is that, the incarceration of Japanese Americans during World War II is just really a story about being the unwanted immigrant in this country. And at that time, it was the Japanese who were targeted and scapegoated for all the challenges that were faced in America. And, people think that the incarceration happened solely because of Pearl Harbor, but, the wheels were in motion for decades before that happened. And that really is the incident that made it possible to lock up an entire ethnic group. But there were groups working on this for a long, long time. And, unfortunately, a lot of the same rhetoric, a lot of the same tactics are being perpetrated today. And so, I certainly am involved in supporting groups who are saying, that we cannot and should not continue to repeat history and make some of the same mistakes that this country has made in the past.
And can we talk just as to sort of come back to the film and keep it connected to today, to talk about the fact that your role as a filmmaker, digging out the facts of the story, Sharon, your role within the legal system, working in good faith, trying to find the truth within that structure, and journalists, that when what I really recall is the role of access of digging, of a free society, how the importance of journalists, the importance of documentarians, the importance of our legal system, because the material that was sort of the linchpin in this particular case was really buried,
Yes.
wasn't it? And it was happenstance in a way that finally brought it to light and allowed the legal cases that you were arguing to finally fall into place in a way that could not be denied, right?
Correct.
Absolutely, yeah. And I think part of what I think is really fascinating in my research and to audiences is the fact that, this information was just found by accident. It was really stumbled upon, and it was only found because it was lost. It was misfiled by the government. And so it was stumbled upon by Peter Irons, stumbled upon by Aiko Herzog Yoshinaga. And, this information probably would never seen the light of day if it had not been misfiled by the government. But just out of sheer persistence by Aiko and Peter, they stumbled upon this. And, the other really remarkable side to this whole story is that not only did they find it, but they are some of the very few individuals who understood what they found. And in fact, Aiko Herzog Yoshinaga was one of the only people who even knew that there was a missing 10th copy of the first printing of General DeWitt's report. Very few people in the world had any idea that there was a missing copy. And she was one of the only ones, and she happened to be the one that found it. So it's so fortuitous in so many ways. I mean, it's as I was working on this with some of Sharon's colleagues on the Core Novus team, Dale Minami and Don Tamaki, they kept recounting to me that it was kind of like this mystery drama. This whole story it really is kind of like a Hollywood story when you really get down to how crazy it was that this was ever found, and the way it came out, and really what was uncovered, and the degree to which the government knew that Japanese Americans were not a threat to national security.
So I wonder today, now that we're dealing mostly with electronic media, I wonder how much more difficult or how much easier it may be for the government to hide their true purposes. If they're, we've already heard that this particular administration is not adhering as closely, as even in a very obvious way, adhering very closely to the Records Act to make sure that documents that flow through are being filed properly. And so you do have to. I do think of your film often when I'm just reading the paper, and I think about the happenstance of having to file something with paper, and the fact that yes, it can accidentally be put into the wrong folder and saved from destruction when someone is trying to purge files, and also the role of a whistleblower. The whistleblower is really very important as we see all of these inspectors general being marched out. Can you talk about the role of Edward Ennis in this story?
Sure. Sharon, do you want to talk a little about Edward Ennis?
Well, I think you really dealt well with that in the film, John. If you want to speak to that, I could
Okay.
up with. Yeah.
No, absolutely. And I think that it's so, very few people, are aware that there were people in the Justice Department who knew the truth and who were trying to reveal the truth. And Edward Ennis in particular, he made it a point to document his objections to how the government was conducting itself, how they were concealing the truth, how he thought the information should be revealed. He was very careful to document everything. And of course, eventually, his opinions were oppressed during in particular the Korematsu case, when it was being heard before the Supreme Court in 1944. But it was because he documented his objections so strongly that the truth eventually came to light. And if it weren't for him objecting so strongly during that time, we would probably never know the truth. And so I think it is, and I think today that resonates, right, with so many people, because there are people trying to come forward with the truth. And unfortunately, we live in a world right now where if you tell the truth, oftentimes you suffer repercussions. Um, and at the same time, you see people who have committed crimes being released. So it's really a backwards society in many ways that we're living in right now. And it's unfortunately so reminiscent of that time in 1942 when the truth didn't matter.
Well, and this is fascinating, and I know we could go on and on. One of the questions I did see go by, I think is a very good thing to kind of talk generally about in this last segment, is very purposefully you are working with Stop Repeating History in order to make these connections, right? And
Yes.
to talk directly to young people, right? Because it is very important that they don't lose faith in the possibility of having a just and equitable government, because otherwise I don't know what the alternative would be, right? We can't have people, we do need to be able to be mature enough to talk about even shameful mistakes in our past, to learn from them and to not become cynical and to give up on having a good and just and equitable government. And so, can you speak to the ways in which your film and working with Stop Repeating History, what some of the projects and some of the ways in which you are working with young people in order to affect that kind of change?
Sure, absolutely. And I think that a lot of us are struggling with a certain level of outrage fatigue right now. There's so many different
Sure.
things to be concerned about right now. Sometimes it could make people struggle with how to address these things. How do I stay in the fight for democracy? And so I think the conversations that we're having through these screenings, through the work of the Stop Repeating History campaign, really helps to energize people. And I think that's part of what I'm really interested in doing in both the legal community, amongst young people, amongst the general public, is that we really need to energize this base of people who care about democracy, who care about checks and balances, right? Who want a government that holds each other accountable. And we really have to energize the base of people that want that for this country. And I think that it's been talked about a lot that a lot of people sat out during the last presidential election. And I think I'm not traveling anymore, but as I have these conversations, I really talk about engagement and being part of our democracy, being civically engaged. It's more important than ever, because it's really the people who have to demand a fair and just society for it to happen, because we can't rely on other people to do it for us, and we can't rely on people, unfortunately, to always make the right decisions, as my film clearly showed. And that we have to make sure that we have people who are going to stand for values that we believe in, and we have to participate, we have to speak out, and we have to be part of our democracy in order to do that.
Well said.
I
Sharon,
think it's really important to stay involved, keep informed, and stay connected with not just our families and our small groups, but really do whatever each of us can in our own venues, do what we can to reach out and really move this country up and in a different direction that we and it takes accountability of those that we've voted in, and vote out people who are not being accountable. And I think it's really we each have to use our own power and find our power in what we can do to stay together and build from here, because there's a lot of There are a lot of almost chaotic actions going on to kind of distract us from what's happening. There's a lot of cover up going on, and I think it's hard to hold people accountable. And I think our votes are going to be part of that. I was speaking to the lead counsel in the Hirabayashi case about what he might want me to bring to a conversation. And his part was, we can't forget that we have experts in just this coronavirus thing. We have experts telling us things.
Mhm.
Right.
The government had experts telling them things in 1942 when they incarcerated the Japanese Americans. We need to listen to what our experts are saying. They are not covering up. They are trying to lead us to truth in a truthful way. So I think we need to be alert to all those different things that are happening that are similar to what was happening in 1942 in order for us to stop repeating history.
Thank you so much. Thank you both so much for sharing your stories. They're so personal, and we really appreciate it. And I hope that it's been inspiring for everyone who's been listening. So if you want to learn more about the ways in which alternative history is being used, please do go to stoprepeatinghistory.org to learn about their program. Also, if you want to recommend Jon's film to your friends, which we hope you will do, you can go
We do
to
hope.
yes, go to New Day Films at newday.com. Do remember, until the end of this month, until May 31st, it will be available for free, but please consider supporting independent filmmakers and independent distributors like New Day by directing your libraries or your schools to consider making a purchase, because this is how we keep this kind of work going, and it's really important. And so thank you all again, and we will check back on our website at peacefilmfest.org for our next Glow, and we'll see you then. Thank you. Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.